When you care about current affairs, it's on the OShow.
Welcome to the OShow, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. I'm your host, Laura Babcock, and I want to thank our audience around the world. It is so fascinating to see all the different countries that have started listening to this pro-democracy, pro-Canada content. We love that you're paying attention. We are all in this together, it would seem, around the world. And also all of you who are subscribing on YouTube and sharing. Let's get to 7,000 subs. And our clips, as you know, get millions of views. So we really appreciate you sharing them across all of our socials and commenting. I promise we read them all, even if they're not pleasant. We will still read them because it's all about dialogue and engagement. So today on the show, if I look a little ill, if I seem a little peaked, it's because I was actually brought to nausea by what Pierre has just said. Given what we are watching happening in the United States with the No Kings protests coming up this weekend, and a desperate fight for their democracy and to stop the autocracy that's taking over their country, Pierre Poilievre said something that at this point I consider dangerous rhetoric, and we're going to get to that. But I was literally sick before we started this recording, just because it's so stressful. Like my stress meter has just jumped, and we're going to get into all of that. Also, of course, we'll touch on briefly the Alberta teachers' strike, because I know a lot of you in Alberta care deeply and are fighting hard. And so we'll touch base on that. And the reason we can talk about all these things, including so many Doug Ford scandals in Ontario, I'm losing track, honestly. We have the perfect guest for all of this, and that is, of course, former Premier Kathleen Wynne. Kathleen is not only a former Premier of Ontario, but also knows a thing or two about education, has some thoughts, and is deeply patriotic about Canada. So I'm so happy to have you here again on the podcast, Kathleen Wynne. Welcome to the O Show.
Thanks, Laura. It's a pleasure to be with you. And you are right. There is lots to talk about.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, let's just touch on Alberta very quickly off the top, and then I want to dive into Ontario, which is going to take us a minute, given all of Ford's antics plus the scandals that keep getting worse by the day. And we talked about on the scandal panel last week, so our audience would be familiar with some of it. But with Alberta, education's always been incredibly important for you, of course, before you got into politics. What is your thought briefly on that for our audience out there who I know are over the second week into this thing? It seems to be going on for a long time.
Yeah, I was the Minister of Education here, Laura. It was really education that got me involved in provincial politics. So I'm very worried about what I'm seeing in Alberta. I know that teachers here in Ontario are about to go into negotiations. And, the fact is that we've seen underfunding of the publicly funded education system. And, that's not unique to Ontario. So the answer is not to privatize and support a charter school system that really weakens the publicly funded system. And so I really hope that the Alberta teachers can prevail, that an agreement can be found that strengthens rather than weakens the public education system. And I would hope the same for here in Ontario. But I have to say that this government in Ontario, and I've been quite clear about this, has not been paying attention to the education system. Through COVID, teachers were not listened to. There hasn't been a lot of investment to help schools recover from COVID. And I know that there are real gaps in special education, in professional development. And so that's the kind of thing that weakens not just our education system, it weakens our economy. And the fact that the Ford government, and I believe the Alberta government as well, doesn't make that connection between a strong education system and a strong economy is a real oversight, and it's a blind spot on their part.
Well, I think it's more about this vision that the wealthy will have options for better education and better employment, and the rest can just suffer. That's what the conclusion I'm coming to with some of these conservative governments, Kathleen. But also, in addition to the areas you talked about, around special education and other resources not being in the school system, I have kids who are teenagers, and I can tell you the level of safety crisis in the schools in Ontario, the lack of resources, in the classrooms to protect the students, to protect the teachers, the teaching assistants, the lack of accountability. I mean, there is so much going on in our schools that anyone who is a parent who made it through COVID with their kids, we should have, there should be documentaries on how we survived those years. But we're still in the after effects, which is a public school system that cannot afford any less investment for the sake of our economy, the sake of our sanity, the sake of our students' safety, and families. And I mean, we need a lot of investment in our school system. So here's to the teachers and everyone fighting for them in Alberta.
Well, and here's the thing, there has been a $1,500 per student reduction in funding in Ontario. There are 2 million kids who go to our nearly 5,000 publicly funded schools in Ontario. So that's a substantial reduction of funds for the school boards. And what the government in Ontario is doing is pointing a finger at school boards and saying, you're the problem. And they're moving towards an ideological undermining of school boards and getting rid of school trustees. That's not the issue, Laura. The issue is that we need to look at what's needed in our schools. We're asking teachers to do a lot. You talk about safety. I have a sister and a niece who are both early childhood educators in the school system, and they see the complexity of the classroom. And so taking money out of the system when we're asking teachers and EAs and early childhood educators to do more is not the answer. So, there should be a review of the funding. There should be a look at the direction we're going. There should not be a knee-jerk ideological abolition of school boards. That's not going to solve the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've never supported removing any kind of democratic lever, which trustees are. I do think as a parent that there should be more transparency and accountability and processes in place to deal with the violence and the bullying in the schools. I've firsthand experience of this, and I don't think that they're equipped. I don't think they're talking to parents in a cohesive way. There's a lot that needs to improve in our school boards, but we definitely can agree on the fact that underfunding them so that you can move towards an argument for privatization so that some people can benefit more in the system is not the way to go. And to
Absolutely
me,
not.
and what makes me so freaking angry, and I'll try not to swear on this podcast with you, Kathleen, but oh man, it's hard because at the same time as you and I are talking about really serious threats to our students' futures and to our economy, we have a premier in Ontario who talked big game at his opportunistic election under the Trump threat back in February about protecting Ontario and protecting Ontario jobs. And what we have learned just in the last week was that money that the taxpayers put into a skills fund development, like an actual multi-billion-dollar fund to be able to upskill people in Ontario. We've got 800,000 people in Ontario who are unemployed. We've got 80,000 living in homelessness and suffering every single day. And what does this premier do with that fund? It ends up going to lobby firms that are close to the premier who then, are able to lobby for clients to get this money to the tune of 100 billion in just, or 100 million in just one firm, 8.5 million in another firm. These are firms that have affiliations with the premier's office. And these are clients that when they looked into it, the Auditor General came out with this, and there's been other investigations on this. The people who got the money weren't even eligible at the level of, the scrutiny that would typically happen within the government. They weren't going to get it, it looks like, without these connections. So that looks like pay to play cronyism. And then we found out yesterday, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, because as I said, I'm very frustrated. We found out yesterday that 17 or something of the trade unions that endorsed Ford ended up getting this funding through to them. I mean, it looks like pay to play. It looks like cronyism. And to me, it looks like corruption. The same words were used by the Auditor General about this, Kathleen, as about the Greenbelt Scandal, right? Like the same language. So please go wherever you want with this.
So, first of all, it's a good idea to have a skills development fund. I think we can all argue that there are lots of organizations who can can boost the skill level of people in, whether they're in a union or whether they're in the auto sector, wherever they are, that's a good thing. And I would suggest right now we need that more than ever. We need to make sure that people have the skills to do the jobs that are available. So the idea of a skills fund is a really good thing. What is really distressing about this process is that the government seems to have, and the Auditor General has pointed to examples where it looks like a majority of the organizations that got the money were either low or very low, moderate to low, on the scale, whatever the scale was that they used. Now, the other problem right now is that the government is not releasing that rubric. We can't look at exactly what the measurement was, what the benchmarks were that the organizations were supposed to reach. So we can't, in the public, we can't evaluate what the government has done. And the minister seems to be digging in his heels on not releasing that process information. And so even if, let's say, Laura, let's set aside our own bias and let's say that it was all above board, then show us, show us what you did and show us why the Auditor General is saying that these organizations that were rated low, that they got the money, and organizations that were rated much higher did not get the money. That's the problem with what we're looking at right now. And so you're absolutely right. It absolutely parallels what we saw from the auditor on the Greenbelt, that people close to Doug Ford, people close to his government, are more apt to benefit than others. That is no way to govern. That is not acceptable. And it really undermines people's trust in government generally, So I see it as a huge problem for our democracy when that kind of bad process is revealed.
And you know what, Kathleen, anytime I have you on, people always bring up the billion-dollar boondoggle around the gas plant scandal. And you've spoken to that in the past. We don't need to relitigate it. No government is perfect. All governments make mistakes. I think what we can clearly see, though, now in year 5 of this Fordian nightmare is that your government, with its mistakes, didn't seem to be systematically corrupt. You didn't seem to have scandal after scandal where friends of your office were getting priority treatment, we're getting deals, we're getting secret meetings that were videotaped saying, you know what, we're going to do what you want. We're just not going to, about the Greenbelt or whatever else. I mean, wasn't the minister you're just referring to here at the Paris wedding of one of the people who got some of this skills fund and behind the glass at some hockey game? I mean, they're not even subtle, they're brazen. For all the things your government could have done differently, I never got the feeling that you guys were in it for the cash on the side business.
Well, and we have talked about the gas plants before, and I have been very clear with the people of Ontario. I apologized. I laid out what had happened, and there was a decision made. And would we do it differently if we knew all the factors? Yes. But the fact is that this is a way more systematic problem that we're seeing with this government. And in fact, if you look at what our government did, we actually changed the fundraising rules, Laura, because even though I can tell you, because I sat in on dinners and meetings with, with people who were potential donors, and the fact that they had dinner with me did not influence my decision making. However, it could look like that. So we changed the fundraising rules about ministers and the premier being at these fundraising events. Now, some of that has been rolled back by the Ford government, but the point I'm making is we were trying to move in the opposite direction. We were trying to remove political influence, even from the judiciary. I mean, if you look at the appointment process that the Ford government is trying to move towards and is putting in place, there's going to be way more ministerial involvement, way more political involvement. We were trying to move towards less political involvement, more of an objective process, so that so that there would be a more level playing field. We seem to be going in the opposite direction with this government, and it's a real problem because insiders are not necessarily the best equipped to do the task, and that's exactly what the Auditor General's report shows, is that there were organizations that rated much higher on the scale of readiness and ability to deliver these skills programs than the ones who got the money. So it's very, very disturbing, and I think that we should all be concerned about that favoritism that really leads to a much less level playing field than we need in a democracy.
And you're very diplomatic as always, Kathleen. I mean, when Ford said to camera, "I'm not going to touch the Greenbelt," and then we found out that he was trying to carve up the Greenbelt for his buddies, I call that corruption. Corruption is lying. It's that public, it feels like disrespect for the public. And we've seen Ford disrespect people who are experiencing homelessness directly. We've seen Ford, decide on people's level of criminality, before they get into the court. Like we've seen that bleeding into the judiciary role, as you've said. We're seeing more and more of this political party majority involvement in things where they shouldn't be. We've seen this power grab with cities happening. We've seen, it feels very Trumpian to me, not to the extremes of the Trump administration, thank God, but we're seeing the same kind of patterns. And we know that Ford is a fan of Trump's. We know that. He wanted him reelected. He was excited when he was reelected. He's talking big tough to him now, kind of. But we know that he's copying some of these consolidation of power into the premier's office, almost making it like there's only one guy whose opinion matters, and if you can get in the room with him or whatever, you're funding him, donating to him. And what the problem for democracy, for people who don't get the problem of money in democracy, I think the extreme version we can see is what's happening in the US. As soon as Citizens United took the guardrails off, you basically have the wealthy people perpetually staying in power because the ethical politicians who try to roll back these access pay to play schemes don't have the funds to do the next election, right? And Mark Cripps, who's a member of our scandal panel, said last week he worked in your government, and he said that he was in the housing department. He talked about how you guys were trying to make it less accessible for these
Right.
kind of things, and there were bribes offered. He said that on the show last week. He found it disgusting, and so he applauded that you guys tried to move away from it. But he mentioned then that undermines your war chest for the next election, right? So people need to understand it's not just that a government, I don't agree with Ford's policies. I don't like the fact that my tax dollars are being used in this way. I think it's corrupt, but I also don't like the damage it does to our democracy.
Right.
You
Right.
know, like
Yeah, I think that has to be our overarching concern, because this government will go and another government will come in. And what we really need as a society is assurance that the system, the structures that we have in place are going to preserve our access to having a voice, to being able to count on our elected representatives. And one of the challenges with a populist government, Laura, because I really think, you were making the comparison with Trump, and I mean, I don't think we're that. We haven't gone that far
no, we
down.
haven't yet. And I said that. I qualified.
Yeah, and
We're
you
not
did,
there
and you
yet.
did. But I think that when you have a populist government in place that really got elected because they were, following the bright, shiny objects and have continued to do that and really don't have an overarching plan. I said this on another panel earlier in the week that as the legislature comes back next week, it's unclear to many of us exactly what the vision for this province is on the part of this government. Yes, I understand that they want to build the economy by building infrastructure, and they talk about creating jobs. But in terms of the fabric of society, and in terms of the vision for our children for the future, in terms of our vision for how we're going to deal with an aging population and make sure that our healthcare system is strong, I don't see a vision that hangs together. And that really worries me because that means that populist impulse to react to the things as they come along. And of course, you have to react. But when there's nothing else, when there's just reaction to a particular incident or a particular crisis, then it's hard to stitch together a long-term vision for the province and the country. So
This is
that's
where
what
this is
I'm
where
concerned about, and I think it shows up in these kinds of distractions.
so this is where you and I always disagree. And for people who haven't watched our previous engagements, let me just summarize why. I don't see it as a reactionary government. I see it as a long-term plan to bifurcate our society between the haves and the have-nots. And if I could see or cite a single policy by the Ford government that did not play to that long-term vision, then I would agree with you. What he does do is react in the moment to headlines and to things he didn't anticipate. And he's really good at distracting from scandals a la Trump. When something bad comes up, he throws something else out there that people go, ah, and they chase. So he's good at reacting to crisis, no doubt. I don't think he plans all those things, but I absolutely have seen his government policy after policy after policy, from breaking their first promise the first day on discontinuing the basic income pilot that he said he wouldn't stop, to what happened with the Greenbelt, to what he's doing with schools, right across the board. They are privileging the people who can live in a gated community with cars and highways and everything else, while they are destroying the people who don't have access, whether it's their city policies or anything else. So if I saw one policy from the Ford government that suggested to me that they were trying to build a more equitable, inclusive,
Mhm.
just Ontario, then I might accept that he doesn't have a big bad plan. But I think he has a big bad plan. But let's go to one of his
Can
distractions.
I just,
Go
I
ahead.
think there
Say
might
it.
be, I think there might be people around him who have that big bad plan.
Yeah.
And I mean, I am no fan of Doug Ford, as you know,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that he has a malicious intent. I think that he gets caught in a moment, and that's why he reacts to these things. I think he's trying to, act for the people, but I do believe there are people around him who, to your point, really see that the private sector, the market economy, the big money in our society knows best, and maybe he believes that too. I haven't heard him express that. And sometimes, Laura, we give governments more credit than they deserve in terms of having some, Machiavellian strategy laid out. So I'm just not
Yeah.
sure but I completely agree with you that the things that this government is doing certainly fit into that pattern and certainly seem to be privileging not the little guy, as Doug Ford says he is, but actually the big guy. And that's a big problem.
And you know what? And you certainly know the job better than anybody else. So I will give you complete points on the fact that you know that it's not that easy to control a big plan. And
Right.
it reminds me of the debate my husband and I have almost every single day about whether Trump is an evil genius or a total idiot surrounded by terrible people, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly. I
so,
mean,
I, so
that's
who knows?
the history books are going to have to tell us that. We don't know
Yeah.
that at this moment.
But
Yeah.
I would love to see Ford implement any kind of policy that helps the little guy, because to
Mhm.
me it's the cognitive dissonance between the rhetoric and the actual policies that causes me
Mhm.
to be cynical. And it's also the fact that he wants to get rid of speed cameras, even though the mayors have said no, please don't take them out of our communities. They're not only good revenue sources, but they're good for safety and for police resources.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, why does he want to get rid of them so bad? Why is he like being so autocratic about this? Well, then we find out that his cabinet cars have been speeding through speed zone kids' school zones multiple times, and that somebody who works for the Ford government stunt drove 12 times. Now, stunt driving, if you don't understand because you're not from Ontario, you have to be going really damn fast to get a stunt driving thing, and it usually has a really high penalty. I have a fast car. I really avoid doing anything like that because I don't want to have my car impounded. But apparently, someone in Ford's government has done it 12 times, been caught, and been forgiven without us getting, again, to your point about transparency, Kathleen, we're not allowed to find out who this person is. In
Right.
any other government, that would be a fireable offense, and it would put into question the judgment of cabinet. It feels like they have one set of rules for themselves and one set of rules for the rest of us. And that doesn't breed trust. I mean, my 16-year-old the other day said, Mom, the system's broken. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, don't say that. There's still good people in the system. We're still fighting it. To hear that level of awareness and at 16 is painful.
Yeah, it's very worrisome. And to my point about undermining trust in government, when kids grow up not trusting the institutions that we've created, that's a real problem. But I just want to pick up on another point that you're making, which is this is a government that really has a complete disregard for evidence. So whether it's evidence about supervised consumption sites, or whether it's evidence about speed cameras, or whether it's evidence about bike lanes, first of all, these are all things that should be largely managed by municipalities, but but this government doesn't seem to, and Doug Ford in particular, and this is something I think does have to be laid at his feet, is that he doesn't seem to care that when the research is done, this is the answer. He doesn't seem to care what the answer is. He's got his own answer and he wants to act on that. Well, I teach a public policy course at U of T, and I always talk about how public policy is made up of ideally three components: the ideology and the belief system of the government that's in office, the public discourse, because that's relevant, and we see that in the media, and evidence. Evidence should play a role in good public policy. And I really worry that that is not what's happening with this government. And so that means we get decisions made that fly in the face of what's actually going on, and probably in the end, Laura, cost us a lot more money and potentially people's lives when you think about
Absolutely.
speed cameras and supervised consumption sites.
And you think about the measles and the vaccine, and like what we're seeing out in Alberta, certainly what we're seeing in the US. The war on expertise started, I believe, with operatives in the Brexit argument, right? If you can make the
Mhm.
elites look, if you can make experts look like elites, and then create an argument around elitism, even though you're probably wealthy yourself, so it's bogus, it's populism. But then what you do is that it gets to a point where the third prong to your public policy development
Mhm.
there doesn't matter anymore, right? And a stool
Right.
that only has two legs, not three legs, is pretty wobbly, easily to tip over and to take over. So,
Well, science is just out the window in that
right,
scenario, right?
which is terrible. I mean,
Luckily,
yeah,
yeah, luckily in Ontario, we haven't gone down that road on vaccines, and in fact, the measles seems to be more under control in Ontario than not. But that is terrifying to me that anybody in the Western world or in the world would be having a conversation about whether the measles vaccine is a good idea or not. Next, polio, like it's
yes.
just terrifying. So that's the danger with the kind of absence of scientific trust that we're talking about.
And so we will get to federal politics in one moment because I believe Pierre Poilievre's party has talked about that very thing about measles mandates, right, or vaccine mandates, and some stuff that's even more dangerous just in the last 12 hours I've seen reporting, which we'll get to. But before we move to the federal issue, because it does tie into this next topic, the whole thing around the RCMP's investigation into Ford and the Greenbelt, not even what we're calling on the scandal panel the Skills Development Fund Fiasco or the speed scandal, but just the stuff around the Greenbelt. We heard that only three or one of the four principals in it have even been interviewed or something like
Mhm.
that, reporting this week,
Mhm.
Kathleen. When I had you on last time, months ago, you said that you heard that maybe people were being talked to. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, I don't know. You know what? I don't have a good answer on this. I can't tell you what's going on. It makes no sense to me that by now everybody in the premier's office who was there at the time, I don't understand why they wouldn't have been talked to. And I don't really like second guessing police forces, because I think they have a really tough job and they do what they have to do. But I really do not understand why we wouldn't be farther along. And if there's nothing there,
Right,
then say there's nothing there,
right.
But the fact that that is not what has been said suggests to me that they are still looking at what's going on or what went on. And if that's the case, then hurry up.
Yeah,
That's
and give
all I
us an
can.
update. Like, why does the media
Yeah,
have to chase them down at the 2 year mark? I have never accused the Ford government of any illegality or criminality. I'm waiting for the investigation to tell me that.
right.
Corruption, I think they've met the test for that, but I don't think that they've met the test for illegality. Or you know what? It looks like it a lot of the time, but we need the proof. I'm a former journalist. I'm waiting for the journalists to keep
Yeah.
getting the RCMP to tell us, but the RCMP has some responsibility on this front too. And just before we leave Ford, to distract from these scandals this week that keep getting more and more. And there's been great reporting. I want to give credit to great reporting, I believe, from Trillium and other independents, and now the Toronto Stars, and everybody's involved in this now. It's going to keep building. And so, what does Ford do, a la Trump? He's great at this. He'll come up with some bogus headline grabbing antic. The antic this time was him bragging at a group full of rich people that he chased down a shoplifter at the Home Depot and threatened him with physical violence, which not only is ew for a public official to do, but I think is against a lot of different things, if not laws. And what it just says to me, this whole tough guy image, he can't back it up in terms of protecting jobs in Ontario and getting anything done. But he uses these examples to look like he's some sort of tough vigilante. The NDP called him Batman, like a wannabe Batman. What was your reaction when you saw that? It's so far away from anything you would have done as premier. As soon as I post this episode, I'm going to get people going, oh my God, I miss Kathleen. Right?
I did an interview earlier in the week, and I was questioned about, a former premier commenting on a premier's actions. And you said earlier that, I was diplomatic. And I really try to not weigh in where I shouldn't, and not criticize where it's not fair. But as a citizen, and yes, as a former politician and premier, I really needed to say about this that it was so inappropriate that the premier would have, so he told the story. Well, okay, but when it happened, the fact that he was threatening, I called it, parking lot thuggery. Like it's just not okay. And so he stepped in because he thought he needed to, but he used his bullying kind of aura and capacity to make this sound like it was okay, to kind of normalize that kind of vigilante behavior. And as you say, threaten violence to this person. We don't know who this person was. We don't know what happened in the incident. But whatever happened, the premier threatening this guy was inappropriate. It was just not right. And what I worry about, Laura, is, the dignity of the office, all of that stuff, that's one thing. But I worry about young kids listening to this and thinking, oh, okay, this is the person who holds the highest office in the province, saying that it's okay to threaten someone with violence in a situation where really somebody should have called the police, or there should have been backup for those store clerks. So I was just aghast that it happened, and then that the premier was telling it in a way that made it sound like, I'm one of the guys and I just had to step up, and really that's okay. It's not okay. And, he should never do such a thing again. And the people around him should be very, very worried that this is something that he thought was appropriate to talk about.
Well,
Or to do.
given his close affinity for police and theirs for him, you think he could have picked up his phone next to his escalator whenever he was driving and called them. I mean, if anyone else did that kind of thing and it was caught on video in a parking lot, they would probably lose their job. If they're threatening physical violence against somebody, and they're not under personal attack, right? It's one
Yeah.
thing if somebody's swinging a bat at your head to say something to stop them or whatever. It's another thing to involve yourself and to do that and then to brag about it. I mean, it was, so this is why I don't, his folksy shtick with his, making pies at Thanksgiving kind of vibe, with his parking lot thuggery, don't line up. Doug Ford
Mhm.
does not line up. And when people don't line up and how they live their lives and what they say, it causes me not to trust them. Let's talk, though, about something I find as dangerous, if not more so, because it's on a federal level. Pierre Poilievre in the last 2 weeks, in my estimation, and I've been warning about this for several years, has taken his Trump-style MAGA rhetoric around some policies where he was flirting around the edges, and now he is getting right down to verbatim copying some of Trump's most dangerous rhetoric. And I don't use the word danger in rhetoric easily, because I believe in free speech, I believe in tough speech, and I'm not scared of a lot of things. But when I hear the guy who wants to be the prime minister, and I hope this disqualifies him, I really do, say that our cities are war zones, when we have seen the President of the United States use that exact language to justify the federalizing of the National Guard, and for the first time, sending these troops into American cities where we are seeing human rights atrocities happening. Necks, people with knees on necks, people's houses being stormed, kids being zip-tied naked and thrown into vans. People have died. This language around our cities are war zones is absolutely irresponsible. It is freaking dangerous, and none of us are missing why he is doing this. It is to inflame a MAGA base, a base in this country that wants what they're seeing in the US. It is a dangerous minority, and it might be the only way that Pierre Poilievre can get across his leadership review, by whipping up his base. But the risk to Canada when he is saying this stuff, I think it is absolutely despicable. And on top of that, he called the RCMP, I believe, despicable or some word like that, because he didn't think that they did enough to look into SNC-Lavalin, and suggested that former politicians like Trudeau, if they broke the law, should be in jail. Like, what the hell? What the hell is that,
Yeah.
Canada?
Yeah. So he is throwing around allegations. He's throwing around language that, as you say, speaks to a segment of the conservative base that, and I've heard this analysis a lot, that this is what he needs to do in order to get through his review. And on some level, you can understand that at a political level, but that doesn't mean you have to approve of it, because I think that once you say those things and once you stir up those feelings, it's very hard to contain them, And again, to the point of the parking lot, it kind of normalizes behavior and language and fear that is, again, hard to contain. You can't pull it back, and people feel that anxiety compounded. So I really worry about this. I think that portraying our society as being completely broken, portraying our cities as being, under siege from criminals is, first of all, it's just not accurate. I mean, I go to the city. I live in the country now, but I go to the city every week. I stay in the city for a couple of nights. I ride the subway. I'm in Toronto. I see where the encampments are. I know that we've got issues around homelessness, but I am not afraid to walk on the streets. I am not afraid to do the things that I've always done in the city of Toronto, where I lived for more than 40 years. And so to portray our cities in this way, I think it's dangerous too. I think it is really, really undermining our sense of cohesion. And so then we turn to things like the Blue Jays. Yay, Blue Jays. It's great that they've done as well as they have so far. But that's not enough to create a cohesive society. We have to trust our institutions and trust each other. And I worry that what that language does is it actually breaks down the trust. We look at each other with suspicion when we're not looking at our phones,
Right.
And so I really hope that he will temper his language. I hope that, this is not something that's going to compound over the coming weeks, because I think his review is until January.
Yes.
And I just hope that the language will be more moderate, because it's not good for us. It ties into the kind of stuff that we were just talking about with Doug Ford, because if you listen to some of the right-wing press, the scaremongering that goes on among some media or online, that's what he's playing into. He's
Absolutely.
trying to inflame that. And so I think we just need to be really careful that we don't get dragged into it. And we need the counterpoint. We need the statistics about what's actually going on. And we need to continue to go out into our cities and demonstrate that that's not the case. I mean, I think about Governor Pritzker in Illinois, and he talks about what's actually going on in Chicago and the kind of city Chicago actually is and the kind of state Illinois is. That's what we need. We need leaders who stand up and say, you know what? Here are all the good things about where we live, right?
Kathleen, I agree with all of that. And if I can just add a couple of fine points as we wrap up here. Here's where it really is worse, I think, than even what you've laid out. Yes, it's opportunistic, and it's in terms of revving up the base. And politicians have always been opportunistic for points and periods in time. Elections are different often than how they govern, etc. So there's a little bit of capacity for the BS. When he talks and his cabinet talks or whatever, his shadow cabinet, when they talk about things like mass deportation, like getting rid of birthright citizenship, like DEI as though diversity is a bad thing and not a statistical strength. Fine, that's your right-wing agenda. We all know it's baked in the cake. It's gross in my mind, but I don't vote for that because I think it's crap. However, when you start to talk about cities being war zones, and you start to talk about Canada being, broken. And I wrote an op-ed in the Star a year ago saying Canada's bruised, not broken, which a lot of people have referenced because, we're not perfect, but we're not broken. Escalating it to the point of using the very language that justified the military invasion of Chicago and of Portland and of LA and of DC and possibly Memphis and God knows where else by the time this show is taped, is autocratic stuff. It is fascist stuff, what's happening in the US. And to use language at this point in time that ties right into that language, not only is it dangerous for every single Canadian, and if you think that they're never going to come for you once it becomes authoritarian and fascistic, then you don't know history, right? But it does something worse, which is it gives the narrative to the US that wants to take Canada. It plays right into their narrative. I get inundated all day long, as you know, with attacks from American MAGA, large even accounts that are trying to divide Canada, make us hate each other, make us, push these narratives that it's
and weaken us.
Weaken us to take us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Prime Minister said they're trying to weaken our economy, right? To take us. I mean, this is what's happening. Our sovereignty and our economy are under dual threat. And while the Prime Minister is doing his best, not as fast as I'd like to see some results, but I think doing his best to help our economy survive this nightmare. We had some good job numbers recently that says that maybe we are. But it's all about getting our sovereignty and getting our resources and our Arctic access. And that's not paranoia, that's just fact. They've said it out loud, they're not being subtle. And so I listen to American media all day long. So when we have someone as irresponsible as Pierre Poilievre for his own political advantage, making it easier for the people who would be our enemies to take us and our sovereignty and plunge us into the garbage insanity we're seeing in the US, every Canadian should absolutely denounce it. So yes, we should promote how real and good our cities are, like the Portland Frogs and their inflation and their mission inflation for this week's No Kings protest. I love it. I think it's brilliant. Yes, we should showcase that we're not war zones. We're not on fire. We're not out of control crime in this country. We all need to say it and say it over and over again until everybody hears it. We have to fight against the BS narrative. We need narrative dominance on that issue. We should also decry Pierre Poilievre and what's becoming the MAGA Party of Canada for not only the rhetoric, but for the fact that that rhetoric helps the people who want to take our country break us apart and take us. I think that is disgusting. I'm not going to use the T word, but I think it's disgusting. Last words to you, Kathleen, as we wrap up.
Well, just that, I mean, it's a very frightening scenario that that we can paint about what's going on right now. And I think that everything that we can do as individuals to strengthen our communities, to strengthen our unity, is what we should be doing. And I know the notion of Prime Minister Carney, it's not moving as fast as we would like, but like you, I agree that he's doing everything he can. And I think that, there's like a public health organization, we don't know what would have happened had he not been doing what he's doing, had he not been working as well with Trump as he is. So
100% tariffs on China, right? Like this,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I think we have to leave our trust with him at this moment. But in terms of elbows up on some of the things that you're talking about, I think we can all have our elbows up to protect each other and to stand up in our communities for what we believe in as Canadian values, and the rhetoric that's coming from Pierre Poilievre is not that. It is not strengthening. It actually weakens us. It divides us, as you say. And I believe we have to resist that wherever it comes from, whether it comes from a conservative leader or from, someone across the dinner table. We have to resist that and make it clear what we actually stand for as Canadians.
Hells yeah, I'll leave it on that. The only swear word I used in 3 different iterations is hell, I think, on this pod. But I will say our friend of the pod, Charlie Angus, who's now doing a great job at Midas Canada, is running a solidarity rally in Toronto. I believe he's calling it the No Tyrants. Check it out if you want to support the No Kings events that are happening in the US this weekend. We can all do it by amplifying. And to Kathleen's point, and I've said this multiple shows now, hang out with your friends. Because the way that autocracy is stopped is when people are pulled out of these rabbit holes that we are being sinisterly pulled into on our phones all day long. And we actually talk to each other and share the reality that's going on. Share posts about, as I posted this weekend, as I was hiking through the woods, so many Canadians from so many diverse backgrounds were all saying Happy Thanksgiving. It was joyous and peaceful. And, that I think that went viral because you know what, that's true. And we need to put truth into this fire hose of MAGA propaganda that's coming from foreign actors as well as from our politicians, which I think is disgusting. Thank you so much, Kathleen Wynne. I'll leave on a hopeful note. No kings. Stand up for your democracy in every way that you can, provincially, locally, federally, and internationally, because we're all in this fight together. Take care, Kathleen Wynne, former
Thanks,
Premier
Laura.
of Ontario, and someone I always love to have a spirited debate with. Because you make me wiser every time I talk to you. Thanks, everybody. Have a terrific weekend and keep your hope up and support No Kings as you can. Take care.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. And with a lot of great gas, she puts them to the test on the OShow. Yeah, there's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the OShow. You gotta stand for something or fall for it all. Canada, you hear the call of the OShow. It's a podcast, the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. Stay informed with the OShow, OShow.
Your merch bin.